Hey guys, Tom here. This is it. This is my Porsche 911 restoration cost review episode. You know, a lot of people won't share their restoration costs because it's usually bad news or kind of a taboo topic. But I'm sharing it with you.
Garage time.
I've shown every step of the process here on YouTube of the restoration of this Porsche 911. If you're not familiar with this project, check out this video right here. It covers the entire scope of this car in one video. It's an 11-minute video from start to finish. Watch that video first and then come back to this one. And I've said from the very beginning, cost was very important to me. And I put a pretty outrageous goal on this car, $10,000, including the price of the car. All right, a $10,000 budget is a pretty aggressive goal for any car restoration, let alone one of these. And I'm not including my own time. This is a hobby for me. This is my home, a two-car garage. Most of the work on this car was done here in a two-car garage. And I'm not a professional. I am also not going to include the tools. Most of the tools used on this car I've already had. I started a 356 restoration a long time ago. You can watch that video right here. But that's an aggressive goal. Let's get to the numbers and see how we did. Are we under budget? If you watch the summary video, you'll know I started this project as a stripped out shell. I bought this shell in 2017 for $4,000. It was on Craigslist here in Southern California. It didn't come with a hood. It actually came with both fenders, although that one was thrown away because it had some accident damage on it. The door was probably fixable, but it had some accident damage on there, so I ended up replacing it with a better door. It didn't have a driver's door. It had been parted out. The deck lid was missing. So all the body modifications that were done, I ended up buying a short hood, $200. The deck lid, I remember getting it in Sacramento. All these parts were purchased over like the course of a year and a half. When I bought the car, it took me a little while to collect parts. My sons and I were on our way home from a camping trip, and we stopped in Sacramento and picked up a deck lid. That deck lid had some damage to it. It had a whale tail on it, so it had some holes in it. The inner structure was damaged. So that was a $150 deck lid. And then I ended up selling the Carrera script that said Carrera on the back. That was 20 bucks. So I got 130 for the deck lid. The door shell over there was from San Diego. I went down and picked it up immediately. It was a great deal at $80, the shell only. The driver's door was a little more expensive, $150. The right front fender, $200. The bumpers, I probably overpaid for the bumpers. The bumpers were $450. Although I sold the center section out of the rear. I didn't use the center section. I think I got like 30 or 40 bucks out of that. So total body costs was $1,285. Oh, and that also includes the SC flares. The flares here were added to the back. $175 for both SC flares. Those were also modified. In some cases, I bought more than I needed. At one point, I had 2 sets of doors. I kept the best ones for myself. I kept a lot of the hardware, and then I sold the stripped out shells. Okay, the next category up is trim. Things like the headlights were $50. These are the sugar scoop headlights. The front turn signals, $125. The door frames here, these were $100 for both. They're used, a little scratched up. Horn grills, $40. The rear quarter windows, frames only, were $40. This car actually came with the glass, believe it or not, in the rear. So that trim totals $355. Okay, the next big category, suspension and brakes. The brakes on this car currently are high-end CNC 6-piston calipers. I'm not including that in this budget. As I've mentioned in the past, this car has 3 phases. Phase 1 was just a basic driver, and I had planned on using brakes from Brembo from a Boxster. So for the budget purposes, I'm using the previous Boxster brakes. I actually had these on hand. The fronts were $185, the rears were $150. These are used calipers that probably would have been rebuilt, but I ended up putting these on directly, kind of bypassed phase 1. I needed a right front control arm because it had been damaged in the accident I talked about. $85 for that. The front strut was also missing on that side. So $182 for the front strut. And then I got the rotors were missing on the front. I got used rotors, had them turned. Those were 20 bucks. And the rear shocks were 50. So I got a total there of, I think, $831. That includes the rear rotors, brand new rear rotors. I have rotors that I would have used with the Boxster brakes, but the new rotors require the Carrera thickness, so I ended up including that here, $115. So total of suspension and brakes, $831. Everything so far are all used parts with the exception of those rotors. The drivetrain, specifically the transmission, I had to buy the shifter assembly. That was $115. Rear axles were $150 for the CV joints, and the actual transaxle was, I think it was $1,200, but with shipping, it's $1,370. That's the 915 transaxle. Okay, very few items for this car were new. In fact, there's only like 6 major items that were new. One of them is the windshield, $185, aftermarket windshield. Both master cylinders, even with the Boxster brakes, I was going to use dual master cylinders. These are from Tilton. They're $220 for both of them. The suspension pan was replaced due to rust. That was $300 from Pelican Parts. By the way, none of these new parts are Porsche parts. One of the secrets for low cost is to take advantage of the aftermarket. All the seals on this car, including the front hood seal, the windshield seal, a bunch of the grommets, the motor mounts, $200 for URO parts. The fuel pump is an aftermarket fuel pump by Walbro, $40 for those. For that one, that's the one that's in the tank. This is just one of them. And then everything is new in terms of brake lines and hoses. But I did not buy prefabricated hoses. One, because my brake lines are custom and my fuel system is also custom. All those lines were made by myself here, $100 for those. And the turn signal lenses in the front, also by URO, very nice quality, are $70. So new parts in total, not one single part was from Porsche, $1,015. And to offset some of those new parts, I actually sold some things off of this car, like the stock rear flares were in good shape, $200. The front turn signals they came with the car. Those were kind of parted out, $40. The impact bumper shocks, front and rear, $50. The washer bottle system was still intact. I deleted the fuel filler bowl and the fuel filler neck, sold those for $95. The rear panel and the license plate thing was about $30. So I got $810 on just selling used parts that came with this car. All right, these seats are practically new. The Sparco R100s. I got these from a woman in Long Beach. She had them in her minivan, believe it or not, and didn't keep them there long. She said they were a little too small. So I paid $450 for the seats. That included the rack, the slides, and also these are reclining seats. So they're in good condition, even came with the boxes. The gauges I picked up used. They're from a swap meet, kind of end of the day deal, $300. Few of them are missed and matched. I think some of them are 912 gauges, but that's a good price. The cookie cutter wheels, $300. Those are 7 inches too, so not bad deal there. And then $200 for steel. Now the steel used to like extend the hood and the short front fenders and all the brackets and stuff that I did is pretty much negligible, like $20. That stuff's like 70 cents a pound. But the roll bar tubing is pretty expensive, 1.5 inch DOM tubing. I put $200 down for that for all the roll bar tubing, and then $500 for miscellaneous things like nuts and bolts, trip to the hardware store, probably the clutch cables included in there, some of the linkage bits, some of the fittings. I included that in the fuel lines and brake lines, but there's just little things, some of the seals and grommets. I'm putting $500 for that. If there's something that you've seen me put on the car and I didn't include on this list because I forgot it, please call me out on it. Just mention, hey, what about this? and I will do my best to explain what it is. I think I've got everything here. The two remaining items are the big ones, where I think we're right about at $10,000 right now. And the two big ones are the engine and the paint. So let's go through those. Yeah, I saved the paint and the engine for last because this is where it gets a little bit fuzzy. And this is also when I realized that I was over budget, right when I was doing the paint. Paint materials were a lot more expensive than I expected. The base coat is from Matrix. Now, I did not choose Glasserit or PPG for a reason. Those are great products, but they're expensive. And so I went with Matrix. I think it's also a great product. Had no issues with it. $275. The clear coat is from SPI, along with all the primers. I feel like for a DIY guy, those brands are perfect. Highly recommend SPI. Their clear was only $225. The epoxy primer, I used a lot of it on the car, $200 inside and out. The 2K primer, 1 gallon, 110. Filler, $35. Dolphin glaze for like filling little pinholes, $20. Sandpaper, I got on eBay, $100. I used Indasa brand. I really liked the Indasa. Reducer and things to clean the gun, like gun wash, $25. Polishing supplies, I have some of the polishing supplies, but I haven't even done the cut and buff on this car yet. $200. And then masking and tape, $75. So the paint materials alone are $1,265. I also remember that I painted some of the car here in my two-car garage, and some of it was done in a paint booth. The trunk area on the inside, the dashboard, the engine bay were all painted here on 3 separate days. And that overspray was manageable and safe to do here in my garage, I felt. However, painting the whole car all at once like we did with Mario, I was not comfortable doing it here in my garage. If I lived somewhere else in a more spacious city, I would have tried that. But I have neighbors, 5 feet fence lines on 4 sides. So that would not work well. I think the risk of getting in trouble with my neighbors or the city could have totally blown the budget out of control. So I went shopping for paint booths to borrow or rent, and that's hard to do. At least here in California, it's not super easy to do. But Mario, who painted my 356, was willing to help, and he has his paint booth, and he ended up spraying the car. It's his booth, his gun, just made more sense. And I consider Mario a friend. I'm a customer of his as well. But I'm not going to disclose the amount that I spent with Mario, because it's just not fair to Mario. I mean, he's running a business, and I've been referring him business. That's not fair for me to disclose that for his purpose, and I don't want to disclose it either. But you can make up your own mind on that one. I had the booth. Friday we spent taping and masking. Saturday was base coat, clear coat, and then we took the car out overnight. On Sunday morning, it sat overnight, so it dried. And so there is a cost associated with that. You guys can put your own number on that one. And then the other cost that is a little bit difficult to put a number on is the engine. So I have a temporary engine in here. It's a 912 engine. I've had this engine for maybe, I think it's like 15 years plus, and it's been sitting around. I've been wanting to sell it for a while, and I thought, let's put it in this car, enjoy the car as is, and then eventually I'm going to sell that engine. So I remember paying, I think, $1,200 for that engine. It needed to be gone through again. It was partially rebuilt. I knew at that point I was over budget, so that's where you started to see me really tightening the screws. I did my own valve job on this engine, replaced, I think, all the valve guides and 2 or 3 of the valves on the intake side. So saved as much money as I could on the engine. That's also when you started to see me, making things like my own throttle linkage. I made some of my own engine tin. I really started trying to save and keep close to that $10,000 budget. But at the end of the day, the paint pushed me over. The engine will be eventually sold. So you can include the price of the engine if you want, $1,200. but this engine's running well. I will sell this engine for a lot more than $1,200, probably over $7,000. And that money will go towards another engine, a 911 engine. Okay, so worst case, you add it all up, $12,500, including a painted car with its 912 engine. If I was to sell that engine for $7,500, then I'd be back down to $5,000. So you can kind of look at the numbers however you want, and you could also say, all right, Tom, this car isn't totally finished, and that's true. I am going to paint the bumpers yellow. I have leftover paint, so that doesn't actually cost me anything. It's just my time. I'll spray them here in my own garage. I have leftover sandpaper and stuff, so I don't think there's going to be an expense with painting the bumpers. The interior and all the dashboard trinkets, I call them, I'm not going to be putting those on long-term anyways. My goal on this car was always to have a minimalistic car. And my 356, on the other hand, is totally different. That's a completely original, numbers matching car with all the original equipment. Now, to do that for this price, $12,500, is just not possible. So this car has always been a good candidate, one, for backdating, and two, for having kind of a stripped out version, kind of a quasi race car. You really don't need the defrosters and stuff for the purpose that I want to do with this car. Basically, it's a toy, it's something fun, you drive it on nice days. I will be connecting some heat and have some defroster on the window, but the rear, like the rear window defroster, stuff like that is not going to work. All the bells and whistles on the dashboard are going to get deleted because I don't have them and I don't want to spend the money on them. I'm going to keep it low budget. So anytime I reached an obstacle, like I got to fix something or buy something, I always thought, number one, can I do it myself versus paying someone else to do it? Number two, can I make it myself, which oftentimes I did? Can I buy a used part, number three? Or number four, last resort, was buy a new part. And like I said, I only bought like 6 things brand new. The most expensive thing was the suspension pan, $300 from Pelican Parts. That's an aftermarket company that makes the suspension pan. And it required some modification, but for $300, you put the extra work in, you get a good result. That's been the mojo for this entire build. So phase 2 and 3 are going to be a little bit more spendy, and that is going to be mostly focused on the engine. So I think it was Ferrari who said you don't buy the car, you buy the engine, or we don't make the car, we make the engine, or something like that. And this is a sports car, and that's where I want to take the money that I've saved on all the hard work I've done, and I'm putting it in the engine. Just for reference, I'll spend more on the engine than I've done on the total car and restoration to date. So just to put it in perspective, sharing my thoughts with you guys, this is probably not typical. I'm not trying to sway anybody to go out and buy a project car like this. You know, the effort I put in was a lot. This is not typical. So typical restorations are about $40,000, depending, like, on average, whether it's an American muscle car or it's a Volkswagen Bug. I mean, you can spend $40,000 on just about anything pretty quickly if you're not willing to kind of do a lot of the work. And some of you have asked about my background. I'm not a professional car restorer. I'm just not. I'm a mechanical engineer. I understand some of the concepts, some of the geometry. I mean, they don't teach us how to restore cars in engineering school. This is really just a labor of love for me. It's a passion that I spend my time doing this. So you tend to get good at it. And to be honest, the 356 really taught me most of these skills. So if you go back and look at the 356 video, you might wonder, like, how did you learn how to do welding? Well, I got started on a 356, and by the time you're done with a 356, you will be a good welder. Like, that's end of story. And now I'm actually teaching other people how to weld because I think it's doable. I think everything I've done on this car could be learned and done by an average Joe. I think that some of you might disagree, but I feel like you have to give it a try. And that's why I'm sharing the costs and the results on this car, because I do hope to inspire people to get out in the garage and build their dream car.